Hello everyone, welcome to the 2021-2022 Advanced Studies Department Universal Screening Parent Information Session for Long Creek Elementary School. I am Meredith Thompson. I am the Talent Development Teacher here at Long Creek. I am also the Cambridge Coordinator and the Creative Arts Magnet Coordinator. My email and my website are listed there on the screen, so if you need to contact me, those are the two best ways to do it. I want to go through our goals for this meeting or for this informational session. The first thing is to define giftedness. The second is to share information about the CMS gifted screening process in both grades 2nd and 3rd, and then also additionally in 4th through 12th grades. And then we're going to look at the CMS gifted identification rubric so that you can understand how students can be certified as gifted. So the first thing, our state requires that our district develop clearly outlined procedures for identifying and serving gifted students. So let's talk about what is a gifted student. So this is what the state definition of gifted students is, and I want to just highlight a few things. You can see them here in red. Gifted students perform or show the potential to perform at substantially high levels of accomplishment. They exhibit high performance capability in intellectual areas, specific academic fields, or in both, and they require differentiated educational services beyond those ordinarily provided by the regular education program. These students come from all cultural groups across all economic strata and in all areas of human endeavor. So when we're looking at giftedness, this is how a student can identify as being gifted. And you can see CMS has 5 different classifications: academically, intellectually gifted, academically gifted in a single subject such as reading or math. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about those in just a few moments. So let's take a look at the CMS gifted screening process. So it is rooted in best practices for gifted identification. It is a universal screener, which means that every student in 2nd and 3rd grade this year will be looked at for giftedness with a minimum of 3 assessment opportunities. And we will use both formal and informal data. So formal would be aptitude and achievement tests. The informal would be a gifted rating scale or a portfolio that a student could create. They are comprehensive and they are aligned to the TD Catalyst model, and they are providing multiple pathways for a student to identify as being gifted. This is the timeline. This is what it will look like for students this year in 2nd and in 3rd grade when they are trying to identify as gifted. And they're very similar with one big difference, which would be this one here at the very beginning of the timeline, which is the gifted rating scale. Now, 3rd graders already have completed gifted rating scales. Traditionally, we have 1st grade teachers complete these on every student in their class. But since we were at home and many of us virtual last year during 2020 for COVID, teachers did not fill out those gifted rating scales. So our 3rd graders have them from 1st grade, but our 2nd graders do not. So our 2nd graders will be rated by their 2nd grade teacher later in October after the teacher has had a chance to get to know the student. So like I said, 3rd grade teachers already have that information. If your child is new to CMS in 3rd grade, then the 3rd grade teachers will be completing this information in late October. So that's the only big difference. The next thing that students will do is everyone in 2nd and 3rd grade will take the COGAT test, which is the Cognitive Abilities Test, in September here at Long Creek Elementary. Then all students will also be taking the MAP assessment, which is the measure of academic progress. And again, that's in September. It'll be again in the winter and in the spring. And then the pink down here is not everyone. So these are the 3 that everyone will do. Certain students will complete Iowa assessments or a TD portfolio. And then all of that information will be communicated in the winter. And so we'll talk about who's going to complete what. So gifted rating scales is something that we were just talking about. First grade teachers did them for our third graders, and second grade teachers will do them for our second graders. And this is done for every single student. And it is looking for giftedness based on teacher observation. And so teachers are looking at the students in 6 different domains: their intellectual, academic, motivation, creativity, their leadership, and their artistic abilities. And then they will rate the students based on those. This is another universal one, the COGAT test, or the Cognitive Abilities Test. It is an aptitude assessment that measures reasoning and problem-solving skills and provides information on how a child thinks. There are 3 different batteries in the COGAT assessment: the verbal, the quantitative, and the nonverbal. Verbal battery assesses language. The quantitative assesses math concepts, patterns, and relationships. And the nonverbal battery assesses reasoning using pictures and shapes. All students will be provided an ability profile, which will guide their instruction and their growth. And that will be provided to both the teacher and the parents. The last universal screener is the MAP test. And it is given in both reading and math. And MAP will be used as achievement data for everyone. So it will be paired with COGAT and GRS to determine gifted eligibility. Students who do not identify with MAP may also have an Iowa opportunity. And so we'll talk about who that is. The Iowa assessment is another reading and math assessment. So it's an achievement test. So think about an EOG, but an appropriate EOG for second and beginning third graders. And students must meet a criteria in order to take this test. So it is not universally given. They must score in the 77th percentile or higher on the verbal quantitative, or the QN composite, or the overall VQN composite. So multiple different things that we'll be looking at. So basically we're going to take those COGAT assessments and we're going to pull the scores apart and look at them to see who would be taking the Iowa. Not all students will, but some students will complete a TD portfolio. And this is a product, or actually 3 products that your students will present. And it is usually their best 3. They will usually create multiple products, and then they get to choose, and I will help them choose the best 3. We will be looking for advanced language, analytical thinking, motivation, perseverance, leadership, perspective, sensitivity, humor, and creativity and artistic talent. So again, not everyone will do this. Only certain students who will be completing a portfolio must meet one of the following criteria. So they must score in the 84th percentile or higher in 3 or more domains of the gifted rating scale, with at least 1 occurring in intellectual, academic, or creativity domains. Or they must score between the 77th and 88th percentile on the overall age composite on the CMS COGAT test, and have not already identified as gifted. Or they must score in the 77th percentile or higher on any battery of the CMS COGAT assessment, and have one of the following factors: be an English language learner, an exceptional child, McKinney-Vento, have a high rate of absenteeism, or multiple entry points within a 24-month period at a school. Long Creek is not a Title I school, so we would not be considered someone that would get points for that. So why the 77th percentile? So when we are looking at how students perform, we look at percentiles, not percentage correct. So when your student gets your information from COGAT, we're going to be looking at the percentile, which is how they perform compared to their same aged peers. So students who score between the 23rd and the 76th percentile are considered in the average range. So that's right there in the middle, okay? They're right where they're supposed to be. Students who perform in the 77th to the 99th percentile are considered performing above average. So those would be the students that we are looking at for giftedness. When we're looking at GRS, it's very similar to that 77th percentile. There's a little bit higher. Students that score between the 84th and the 98th percentile have a high or a very high probability of scoring as being identified as gifted based on that GRS, which is the teacher observation. If students are scoring between the 69th and the 83rd percentile, they have a moderate probability of identifying as gifted. And if they're below the 69th percentile, this doesn't mean that they're low performing. It just means that they have a low probability of being identified as gifted. So a little bit different than just thinking about a percent. So let's take a look at the rubric. The rubric that CMS uses up until, I guess, next year, students earn points on this rubric by scoring in the 77th percentile or higher. This rubric is one that I like because it has a more direct path to gifted identification than there ever has been in the past. And once a student identifies as gifted in any capacity, the process stops. So we don't continue searching for giftedness, even if they identify in either reading or math. They are considered gifted and they are certified. And there are multiple pathways for students to identify as gifted in CMS. So let's take a look. This is the rubric. It's very confusing looking. And I usually end up filling out one of these on every student in the second and the third grade. And we look at lots of different things. They will have their COGAT assessment. Their scores will be on here. Their MAP and or Iowa will be on here as well. We'll pull the COGAT assessment apart and we'll look at the verbal and the quantitative and the nonverbal scores. We'll look at that with math so we could do a single subject certification. We will look at informal, so their gifted rating scales, their teacher observations. We will look at portfolio work. So this is a year most of a year-long process for some of these students, and it really does help us to find our gifted students that maybe in the past would not have been identified. So again, these are our 5 different identification labels, and it really just depends on what they're scoring on this particular rubric. It's really not something that parents need to worry about. That's just how CMS knows which path they identified through. And the only big difference would be if your child is gifted in reading or math, when they would be looked at for how they're performing in the classroom, we would only be looking, if they're identified as gifted in reading, we would only be looking at their giftedness in reading. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't receive TD services in math as well, but they're not identified in math, so then they would not be required to be performing above their same aged peers. So let's say your child goes through this process and still does not identify as gifted. That does not mean that they are not going to get to work with the talent development teacher, with myself. It doesn't mean that they won't get to be in the higher groups and higher classes. We use a catalyst model at Long Creek Elementary School. So any student who is performing highly would get to work with me for challenging activities. Unidentified students may be rescreened after a period of 24 months. So that means that our second graders can be rescreened, can be retested for giftedness in 4th grade, and our third graders could be retested in 5th grade. We do retest every single year, with the exception of last year due to COVID. The decision on who to test is made by the TD site-based committee, which is a group of teachers that meet and we look at student data and we talk about how the students are performing in class. So again, it's not just a one test thing, and then we'll do the rescreening process for those students. The screening process will continue to include both formal assessments as well as with their achievement scores, so how they're doing on MAPs and EOGs. The screening window for 4th and 5th grade students typically occurs in the winter. So that would be, if your child doesn't rescreen, it's not something to stress about. We can always look at them in the future. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. My email is there in the message. You can reach out on Parent Square as well, and you have my website as well. Thank you so much for attending. If you've made it this long, thank you so much. And please make sure that you sign the parent that you've attended. I'll put a Google form link in there, and it'll just be your child's name and your name. Thank you again. Have a great day.